He misses, but they don't miss out. Their day, their year, their joy.
Extreme disappointment. The words used by Sydney Swans coach John Longmire after another jarring grand final defeat. Despite being the favourites to win the match, going up against an inexperienced Western Bulldogs side that was keen on completing their Cinderella story, the Swans were outworked on the day, with Longmire saying that they weren't quite up to the work rate that they normally get from the group. The Bulldogs ended the game as 22-point victors, Sydney unable to halt the irresistible momentum that the Dogs had built in the first 3 weeks of September. After all of the hard work that the Swans had gone to throughout the season, which included securing 17 wins and ending the season on top of the ladder, John Longmire's men were only left with bitter defeat, and the sound of one of Brian Taylor's most iconic lines haunting them. 2017. New year, new Swans. The previous year's grand final had very obviously created immense expectations for the club. Experts touted the Swannies to make a top 4 push, with the healthy mix of experience and youth expected to once again play a major role in propelling the red and white. The superstars of the club, including Buddy Franklin, Josh Kennedy, Dan Hanbury and Dane Rampey, were in the primes of their careers. The team culture was strong, and after the disappointment of 2016, there was even more fuel in the fire to hang up banner number 6 at the SCG. The Swans were ready to put on a show for the ages and put the rest of the AFL on notice. This was bound to be the year that the Red and White Army would not forget. The Swans entered the pre-season as a relatively unchanged side, with the only major change being bold magnet Tom Mitchell, who was traded to the Hawks in the off-season. 2 wins from 3 pre-season games set Sydney up to start the season well in what optimistic fans were hoping would be a revenge tour. But that's when it all started to go wrong. A game against Port Adelaide at the SCG was the ideal opener for the Swans. In the last 11 seasons, Port Adelaide were yet to register a win in Sydney's home stadium. Although injuries certainly changed the dynamics of the squad entering the match, with injuries to Jared McVeigh, Gary Rowan and Tom Papley, as well as young star Isaac Heaney missing the start of the season due to glandular fever, this did not seem to change spectators' outlooks on the result, with bookies giving Sydney a high probability of winning the game. The Swans were ambitious to start the season on the right foot, and a strong statement win against the Power would certainly do that. But to put it bluntly, the Swans were wasteful. Despite playing 3 debutants and ruckman Paddy Ryder playing his first game in over a year, Port were the ones to show composure and energy where it mattered, punishing Sydney's mistakes and kicking 8 goals to 4 in the second half to come out as 28-point winners in a shocker. Longmire spoke on Sydney's basic mistakes in the post-match interview, stating that we didn't have a lot of players win their positions, and that included our experienced players. The forward line, coached by AFL legend Tony Lockett, was one of Sydney's brightest positives. With Kurt Tippett, Sam Reid and Buddy Franklin, the Swans had a forward trio capable of overpowering games, and for a moment, they did. Trailing by 28 points late in the third quarter of their round 2 grand final rematch against the Bulldogs, Buddy's late goal sparked some hope. Facing the prospect of going 0-2, Sydney's tall forwards took charge. Franklin kicked the first 3 goals of the final term, and when Reid marked and slotted his 6th, the Swans hit the front midway through the quarter. But just as they looked set to steal it, the Dogs rallied, booting the last 4 goals to win by 23 points. It was only the second time since 2006 that Sydney had started a season 0-2, and the loss of Tippett to injury left them missing 6 players from the previous year's grand final side. If Sydney's tall forwards were incredible during round 2, they were the complete opposite in the round 3 match against the Pies. Buddy was kept goalless in his 250th game, and Sam Reid was kept to just 1 goal in a good defensive showing from the Collingwood backline. However, the Swans looked to other outlets throughout the game, with youngster Will Hayward kicking 3 in an energetic display, as well as Kieran Jack kicking 2. Despite lethargic patches throughout the first quarter, which was turning out to be a trend for the season, the midfield began to work itself into the match after a furious spray from John Longmire. And just like that, the Swans had caught the lead with less than half a quarter to go. Unfortunately for the Swans, a late goal from Will Hoskin-Elliott decided the game, and despite a goal from Nick Newman, Sydney would go on to lose by a singular point, leading to the ex-grand finalists being in an awkward 0-3 position. In spite of their winless start, the Swans had remained competitive throughout the first 3 games. In the last 2 matches, Sydney had fought back to take the lead in the 4th quarter before fading away, showing that Longmire's men had the fight and ability to get out of this rut and recover their season. With more experience into their younger players and the leaders of the club ready to step up, Sydney was more than capable of winning their round 4 clash against the old foe, the West Coast Eagles. In a game played with finals-like ferocity, the Swans once again faced a daunting deficit at the final change. Things looked grim early when Lance Franklin copped a brutal bump from Shannon Hearn, leaving him gasping for air and struggling for the rest of the match. Despite his limited movement and the team's inexperience, Sydney clawed their way back, a developing trademark of the red and white. When Jake Lloyd nailed a goal 9 minutes into the last quarter, the margin was down to a single kick, sending nerves through the Eagles' home crowd. But as West Coast lifted, the Swans faded, falling by 26 points. It was another competitive but costly loss, and by then, AFL media had largely written off Sydney's season as anything but respectable, let alone finals bound. The availability of Sydney's stars were a major reason for this poor start. The Swans were clearly missing the experience of 6 injured players that played in the 2016 Grand Final. Up to round 4, Sydney had played 5 debutants, which was unheard of from a team that was in the decider just a season prior. Adding on to this, the Swans had fielded 12 players that had played less than 50 games in their careers. It was clear that the health and experience of the Swannies list was impacting their form, and this was slowly hurting their confidence. One of Sydney's biggest problems was their sudden drop in contested possessions. In 2016, the Swans ranked 3rd in the AFL for contested possession differential, but a year later, things had completely flipped. After 4 games, they sat 16th, averaging 8.8 fewer contested possessions than their opponents, a stark contrast from a team that was once built on winning the hard ball. It would be easy to blame inexperience, but the issue ran deeper. Veteran midfielders Dan Hanbury, Kieran Jack and Luke Parker, all proven inside players, were well below their best. The decline also extended to their uncontested game. Sydney had been 5th in the league for uncontested possessions in 2016, but dropped to 15th in the early part of the new season. With the experienced core struggling to find the edge, it raised an uncomfortable question. How could the youngest Swans possibly carry the load? This lack of ball winning contributed significantly to the lack of scoring output that the Swans had displayed during the opening rounds. Putting up big scores seemed to be a regular thing for the Swans in their top of the table finish in 2016, averaging 98.4 points per game to be ranked 4th in the league. In contrast, the average fell to a measly 78.2 points per match, being ranked 15th. To put it simply, the Swans' inability to win the ball resulted in a lack of scoring throughout the game. If the Swans wanted to be the first team to play finals from 0-4 since the 1975 North Melbourne Kangaroos, John Longmire's squad needed to focus on these glaring issues, and quickly. Did the Swans do this? Absolutely not. Despite Sydney welcoming back trio Kurt Tippett, Gary Rowan and Isaac Heaney, and starting the match by kicking 4 goals in the first 5 minutes of the game, the Swannies once again fumbled under the pressure and allowed the Giants to score the next 9 goals to eventually ride the wave to an emphatic 42-point victory in what was GWS's first win at the SCG. The expansion side bullied their older brothers, obliterating the Swans in contested possessions and creating another week for Sydney to negatively reflect on. To make this sad story even worse, Sydney made it 6 losses from 6 against a Carlton side that had just lost their previous match by 90 points. A dominant second half set Carlton up with the win, and Sydney were looking on the wrong end of history. The Swans were the first team to ever start a season 0-6 after playing in the previous season's grand final. If the AFL media still had a slither of hope that the Swans could make September, it was surely gone by now. No team had ever made the finals after starting the season 0-5, let alone 0-6. John Longmire hadn't lost belief in his squad making finals, in spite of history saying otherwise. Longmire would say, "There's still a lot of footy to play this year, and we just have to get up off the canvas and get going again. There's no easy way to do it. There's a test in AFL football every week, and we haven't come up to scratch yet, but we need to get going in a hurry." Longmire was right. There was plenty of footy left to play in the season, and the Swans senior players began to realise what they should correct in order to make the most of the year. Although there was plenty to improve on-field, it was a lack of voice off-field that was noted by the veterans of the squad. After the round 6 loss, Dan Hanbury raised their voice and effort were basic areas where the Swans were now lacking. Defender Heath Grundy stated, "As a senior player with a lot of the other guys, we knew that this wasn't acceptable, and not how we played our footy, and we had to try and change it." With a refreshed view on how they should communicate with one another, the Red and White boys aimed to galvanise together and take accountability for the rest of their season. The Swans players knew that they had to not only win more of the footy, but defend better as a unit. The game style that helped Sydney make a grand final in 2016 was easily achievable, and the Swannies were ready to show the world that they still had what it takes to accomplish the impossible. Surely they couldn't do it, could they? The next 4 months of the season affirmed the belief that the Swans had in themselves. The issues that had jarred Sydney at the beginning of the season were significantly improved upon. From round 7, the Swans ranked first in the competition in both points for and against, consistently putting teams to the sword with a series of demolitions in their season resurgence. The Western Bulldogs, GWS and Carlton, teams that had defeated the Swans convincingly during their 6-game stretch, were beating emphatically in their rematch later in the season. By round 16, the Swans had won 8 of the last 9 games and miraculously sat in the top 8. Youngster Nick Newman spoke on the Swans' replenished game style that had them winning 14 out of their last 16 games. "We had just got back to winning the hard contested footy and defending well, and it came from that. There was nothing too complicated or out of the box. We didn't invent anything, we just got back to the basics." 2012 Premiership star Jared McVeigh returned from injury, which assisted the veteran midfielders that had slumped early on resetting back to their best, building off of their formidable contested ball credentials to get the ball rolling for the rest of the squad and allowing them to get back to playing tough, gritty brand of footy that the Swans were known for. Buddy Franklin continued to be a consistent bright spark in the forward line, kicking bags on his way to his 4th Coleman medal with 73 goals in the season. Youngster Tom Papley returned from injury during the season to become an influential Robin to Buddy's Batman, kicking 30 goals himself. The return of key defensive player Dane Rampy during the season lifted pressure off of the Sydney backline, who, along with Heath Grundy, established a damn wall in defence, ranking first in the comp in points against from round 7, and were able to create runs off of halfback to generate fast break points. It was clear that there was a general shift in the outlook of the Sydney Swans from the low point of 0-6. The AFL media's prediction of a top 4 finish seemed like a laughing matter after the first 6 rounds, but the Swans' rally to end the season brought them awfully close to making this true. 14 wins on the season landed the Swans in 6th place on the ladder and had spectators that had written them off eating their words. Despite the massive hurdle that they had to overcome, the Swans were in September. Ravaged by injuries in the early season, Sydney now fielded a side that had 5 of the 6 injured grand final players that they so desperately needed in the 0-6 start. The young legs that Longmire was persistent with had now experienced the true ups and downs of a season and were better for it. The healthy mix of veterans and youngsters created a side that was dominant in the second half of the season, and the Swans looked to continue this dominance well into September. Kieran Jack would say, "We certainly think we can compete with the best if we were to push forward again this year. We just have to keep putting the foot down and make sure we give ourselves the opportunity to get there." And put the foot down they did. In the elimination final against the Bombers, the Swans piled on 10 goals in the second quarter to bring the margin to 61 points and bust the game wide open. From there, Sydney cruised to a dominant 121-56 win in a game that showed the high offense and defensive pressure that had revitalised the Swannies season. Sydney dominated at ground level thanks largely to captain Josh Kennedy and Luke Parker, and played a game that was described as powerful footy by John Longmire. The Swans had sent a warning message to the remaining finals teams, but their biggest test stood in the way: the Geelong Cats at the MCG.
And Geelong are into their 8th preliminary final in 11 years off the back of 4 goals from that guy. It really has been a remarkable night for Geelong at the MCG.
And just like that, their season was over. The Swans were dominated from the second quarter to lose by 59 points. In greasy conditions, Sydney were not able to play the game style that had gotten them so far. The Cats won the disposal count by 119, with 25 more contested possessions limiting the amount of times the Swannies got the ball into their forward 50. With 41 inside 50s for the game, the Swans forwards were unable to get themselves into the match. Buddy kicked 0 goals 3 in a lockdown effort from Harry Taylor. Sydney finished with 39 points, which is by far their lowest total for the season, and a sad ending for a side that had gotten themselves out of the depths. I sensed our players still wanted to keep going during the week. I didn't sense any drop off, but we dropped off and we let ourselves down. We need to get better. We've been going flat out for 18 weeks, playing elimination finals every week. We were a game and a half off top 2 in the end, so when you talk to the players afterwards, it's a combination of we didn't do anything we wanted to do tonight. And just like that, the joys of making the finals from 0-6 were ripped away. A side that had done everything that could be done to rewrite history were now just another side that lost in September. The Swans would go on to experience the full range of highs and lows that AFL football has to offer in the years that followed. The veteran stars who once dominated their midfield eventually retired, and just 2 years after their remarkable comeback story, Sydney has slipped out of the top 8 entirely. The seasons that followed brought plenty of heartbreak, including 2 crushing grand final defeats, both featuring 4 of the Swans' 2017 debutants. Eventually, the club entered a new era, appointing Dean Cox as senior coach to succeed the long-serving John Longmire. Many of the heroes from that 2017 season have since moved on, but the memories of that unforgettable year when the Swans turned a disastrous 0-6 start into one of the great redemption stories will always hold a special place in the hearts of Sydney fans.